All right, welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Engel from Town of Elizabeth PD in Colorado. This is his 35th year in law enforcement. Really excited to introduce you to Chief Engel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I've loved our offline conversations. I'm really excited for today's podcast, but I wanted to see, 35 years is a long time to be in law
Yes.
enforcement. What keeps you passionate about this job? What keeps you here after 35 years?
Well, that's a great question because there are moments in time when that passion kind of fleets.
Mhm.
But really, at least in the position that I'm in now, it is really the people that I work with that keep me going. We have a young agency, and to see how they are developing, and when we provide or some mentoring and guidance is provided, and all of a sudden that like they have that aha moment and things click. That's what really drives me, um, and keeps me going in this profession. In all honesty, I think that it may be a different story if I was working patrol or back in investigations. It might be a little bit different story, perhaps. But now that I'm in the administrative level, that's what really keeps me going and it keeps me grounded. I think that with our young agency, just working around young people too, really keeps me going. You know, kind of gotta, I don't want to say show them up, but every once in a while, man, you gotta let the tiger out of the cage. So,
Well, it sounds like it breathes a little bit of like fresh air,
yeah.
and it's interesting that you said that because I feel like there's a lot of conversations about the younger generation and you know, work ethic or them asking why and, that curiosity or wanting to change things. But to have that perspective of like, we have a younger agency and to be able to be a mentor for them and to see them grow and develop over time is something that excites you and keeps you going, I think is such a positive perspective to have.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, in law enforcement, they do talk about the generations, and that's always been a constant. I mean, I know when I was a baby fuzz, I guarantee you the folks that were sitting in the seat next to me as my training officer were thinking the same thing. And so that that evolution continues. But one thing that I have noticed is that, the new generation, they're critical thinkers,
Mhm.
that they do bring a spark of creativity. And certainly, the technology aspect have a way more superior skill than myself. But they do bring value, everybody brings value to the agency. And in this new era of law enforcement, having that new generation, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where things go from here as my shelf life comes to a close.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that you're right that everyone has value and everyone's going to have different strengths and weaknesses. And how can you come together as a team to support both? And the technology piece is really interesting. There's so much coming out right now, and I think you can kind of determine like where you are based on
Mhm.
how you are with technology. And it came quick for me where I thought I was on top of it. And then I realized really quickly that I'm starting to age out of that and becoming an elder millennial or, you know.
That,
But I do appreciate that perspective of everyone has value and, how can you come together as a team? Um, I know like you said, you've been in this career for a long time. What are some of the different assignments that you've had, and how did you prioritize your wellness throughout your career with the different levels of stress?
huh. Well, it's a good question because over the course of my career, I was assigned to patrol. I was assigned to our in-service instructor cadre. I was also part of investigations, doing undercover investigations along with major crimes, financial crimes. and then doing street crime investigations along with supervision. So in that time, many of those positions, I was not only a detective, but I was also a supervisor in those respective areas. So, when I started, there was no focus on wellness. In fact, when I graduated the academy, our wellness portion, specifically for the mental health aspect and resiliency, was about a 5-minute conversation with the assistant chief, and the wellness speech kind of came down to is that you're entering into a new profession. You're going to see the baddest of the bad at the worst times of the worst times. Um, you're going to see changes in yourself. You're going to see changes in your thought process. Um, don't be afraid to acknowledge those. I mean, that's a really um, overbroad summary, but that's kind of how the conversation went.
Yeah.
There was a significant focus on, uh, at least in the academy, on physical fitness, certainly, and that's something that I took to heart in part because I wanted to go into special operations, which I was for 15 years. And, in order to stay at the top of the game, to go from those moments where you are very sedentary and all of a sudden now you have to act, you needed to be in in a high level of physical conditioning. So there's always been a focus on the physical fitness aspect, but not as much on the wellness and the balance of having that work-life balance, that balance between work and relationships. There just there wasn't much of it.
And do you think that your focus on physical wellness helped you in the mental wellness space? Do you feel like that helped you to offload stress, maybe without even recognizing that that's what you were doing? Do you feel like that helped you throughout your career?
Well, absolutely. I think that being able to, push yourself during a workout and I happen to be a runner. So, training for marathons and training for half marathons allowed me that opportunity to go out and, you know, whether it be on a treadmill, and believe me, everybody hates running on a treadmill. It's horrible. You know, but whether it was a treadmill run or going out on a trail run, um, just kind of gave me the opportunity to decompress
Mhm.
and focusing in on your breath control, focusing on that next step, trying to especially if I was doing a long mountain run, focusing on not necessarily the next step, but also, making sure that I didn't fall off the trail. But but focusing in on that pain control, because you're going uphill or going downhill, and all of a sudden now you're having that pain, and you're kind of focusing in on it, and you're not focusing in on anything else. So I think that just gave the opportunity to decompress and not have to focus on things, that were work related.
And I love that you said, because in essence, you're saying like you are able to be present in those moments.
Hmm.
You're focusing on your breath, you're focusing on the discomfort or the challenge that's happening within your body. You're also trying to make sure that you don't fall off a cliff and die. So you're focusing on, intentional steps. And that's being present. That's really the definition of mindfulness, right? It's like how can you focus on what's happening in the present moment with your breath, your body, your surroundings of what's happening now. And it does take you out of that headspace of thinking about things that happened in the past or, previously on shift or worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow. It does
Mhm.
really bring you in and it regulates your nervous system in a way, because you're not in this like intense fight or flight. You're not thinking about all these things, but you're actually breathing and you're, in the present moment. There's also so much science and research to support that it reduces your cortisol by 20% in 10 minutes. Any sort of physical movement or exercise is going to reduce your stress significantly. I mean, 20% reduction in stress is huge, in 10 minutes, which is such a short amount of time. So I love that you mentioned that. But one of the things that you said that I really liked was you said doing a hard workout. You used the word like hard. And then that kind of pain control, how do you think that fitness programs or fitness in general helps to promote mental resiliency? Because to me, it's like you're training your body and your mind to do hard
Mhm.
things. How do you think that that's helping to promote mental resiliency within individuals and within organizations?
Think well, and you bring up good points about being present and understanding where your body is at certain points. And when you get into that hard workout and maybe you're doing I don't know 100 burpees or whatever it might be, right? And all of a sudden you're on that 25th one and you know that you got 75 more to go and you're already on the suffer bus. But but when you start realizing that, hey, I know that I can do this, and you kind of give yourself that self-talk that I can do this. And yeah, you may have to take a 5-second break, to kind of gather yourself, but you continue to push, and those incremental steps really bring you towards that ultimate goal of completing whatever that workout is. And I think that's when you run into a situation that tests your resiliency, is that it's not about the end goal right away. You have to take those small incremental steps and focus on that particular win in the moment. And then those incremental steps will ultimately get you to that goal, whatever that goal may be.
I love it. And I'm going to tell you right now that you're not going to catch me doing 100 burpees, but I'm joking. I could totally do it, but no, you're exactly right. I think a lot of times, we hear these words thrown out in the wellness space. Resiliency is one of them. Stress management or stress mitigation is another. And I think if we can really boil down and ask ourselves, okay, what do these things mean? And what are the steps that we can take to get there? Mental resiliency is trained action. And that's
Mhm,
exactly what you just said. It's those incremental steps to get to an end goal. It's pulling from within you of like, no, I can do this, and you're training yourself to be able to do hard things. Stress management is reactive, right? It's like you went through something really stressful
mhm,
or a traumatic event, and how can we help to offload those things or manage those things? Mental resiliency is proactive. It's trained efforts so that you're preparing yourself for what's to come. And you know that in this profession that
mhm,
there are things to come, right? So how can you proactively put in place measures to help train your brain to be able to withstand hard things so that when hard things happen, you're better prepared and
mhm,
equipped to be able to handle those
mhm,
things. And I think that physical fitness is a really good strategy. There's obviously other things that can be done. I also think that if someone's maybe a little bit more resistant to like the mental health side of things, meditation, mindfulness, visualization, if people are maybe a little resistant to that, the physical part of it is a really good strategy to start because I think that everyone can get on board with something like that.
yeah, agreed.
You used an analogy that I really liked when we talked offline, and it was the cracker box analogy. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Well, every day is kind of like a box of Cracker Jack. You're not really sure whether you're going to get some delicious caramel corn. You might get some nuts, and you end up getting with a really lousy prize. So that's kind of, when you come into the day, in my world, is Mondays, right? You're kind of coming in, you're not really sure what's going to happen. And, it could, the Monday could be really good, and then you never know. And I mean, in law enforcement, it's like that every day. You're not sure what you're going to get. You really don't.
Yeah. And at the time of filming this, it's a Monday for anyone who doesn't
Mm.
know. So I'm gonna mark this as a really good prize that we get in the cracker box. Um, but how do you think you can mentally prepare for the things that you may or may not experience on a day-to-day basis? What are some, actionable steps or resources that you guys try to implement or things that you think would be helpful to prepare you for those things?
Well, one of the things that and having a fairly robust training background is I really encourage, especially when I was a baby fuzz, and I mean it was a strategy that worked for me, but doing a lot of role play and visualization. Um, you know, in the environments that I worked in, there was always a lot of unexpectedness. I mean, I worked in a major metropolitan police department and in a high crime area, and you weren't exactly sure what you were gonna run into, right? You had some relative ideas, but as you're going in and you're starting to prepare for that shift, you're kind of visualizing what it is that you may encounter, and then you're visualizing your reaction. You're developing that neurological pathway as to what your course of action is going to be. So in the event something that kind of mirrors what you visualized, there is a plan of there is a plan of action. Um, because I have seen where if you don't do that visualization, you don't do that mental repetition, is that you have the fight, flight, or freeze, and you're going to freeze
Mhm.
because you don't have that neurological pathway of some type of action, whether it was trained or not, especially when it comes to younger officers. Being a small agency, we don't have, I mean, yeah, I mean, we have crime, but it's certainly not as prolific as it is in, say, Denver or Aurora. It's just not. We don't have the population. So, but we still have the same crime. It just doesn't happen as frequently. So having that and engaging in that visualization helps develop those pathways and helps forge a course of action when the time comes.
I love that. And you're speaking my language 100%. Visualization is so powerful. And it's something, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but I used to be a professional skydiver and I trained military skydiving. And that was something that we did all the time
Mhm.
was visualization and really trying to visualize in great detail, everything
Mhm.
that's going on and how you can do it effectively and safely, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, when your brain goes on overload, when you're in fight or flight and it's actually happening and it's fight or flight or freeze, you have that mental preparedness and that training to fall back on
Mhm.
because you've done it so many times in your own mind of visualizing this type of scenario or situation. So I absolutely love that advice, and I think that it's super effective. One thing is, you can start like really simple. I think sometimes like visualization can be um, kind of a practice that needs to be trained, like maybe if you're
Mhm.
not used to it, and it can be something super simple, and then you can gradually kind of increase it from there. But I love it. I think it's great. I think that's really good advice. I know that you said you're a small organization, and when we talked offline a little bit, you've been building up your wellness programming
Mhm.
and, trying to figure out what's the most effective for you guys. And I was hoping you could maybe give some background into, you know, how you started implementing a wellness program, if there are any sort of um, events that led up to that that really, made you take a look, and then what are some of those resources that you currently have now for your organization?
Yeah. So I wasn't the chief at the time, but there was a significant event that had significant impact on a number of officers. There was a murder suicide of of a small child, and that really had impact on a lot of officers, in part because they all had small kids.
Mhm.
So seeing that, the executive at the time put those officers on more or less, a paid time off in order to, kind of work through some of the psychological trauma that they had experienced because it did have impact. As a result, there was nothing in place in the agency. So they started up at that moment, they started up a peer support program. So when I came in as the executive for the department, I came from another agency to the west that um, had developed a very robust wellness program. That too was also a result of a critical incident. And unfortunately, it seems like a lot of wellness programs come as a result of a critical incident. But that said, is once I came in, I saw that they had a peer support program, and we needed to develop it in part because it's about longevity.
Mhm.
It's about longevity in this career. Um, it takes about, 7 years to give or take, for somebody to become really competent and proficient in this profession. And that's not based upon any scientific research. That's strictly empirical data collected over the course of several years. So, um, but along those lines is during that 7 years to reach that level of proficiency and competency is that there are kinks that are made into that psychological armor. And in order to reinforce that psychological armor, we have to develop a system or develop and provide resources in order to kind of take the kink out. While that kink is always going to be there, we want to reinforce it so that, when somebody gets, 30, 35 years into their career, if you have a pension, maybe it's 2025. But you want to make sure that that's longevity. And then when you hit that magical date of, hey, I'm done, then you're going into your chapter two and you're going in well versed. And what I mean by well versed is that you are prepared to take on that second chapter of life. Whether it's you're going back into getting another job, or maybe you're you know, doing something else, fishing, that's one that I hear quite a bit. But again, you can only fish so many lakes. So um that's where I kind of knowing that we needed to build something for longevity is that we then looked at, in addition to our peer support program, is bringing in professional psychological services to have that annual checkup. And if you need additional services, then hey, we'll pay for it.
Yeah.
Even though we're a small agency, we received a grant through the state of Colorado where we are now providing while it's a work day, um, you only have to work 1 hour that day. And that one day is that you have to go see a psychological professional. You can say whatever you want, but that's 1 hour that you have undivided to that psychological services provider, and the rest of the day is yours.
Nice.
And hopefully you're, doing something wellness with your family. Um, but the rest of the day is yours.
I love that you said that, like, hey, like we recognize that we needed these resources. We recognize that we want to create longevity in this career. I also love that you said there's a kink and you want to reinforce it,
Mhm.
because that to me was very visual of like, okay, like this happened, but like how can we make sure that, it doesn't get worse, or it doesn't, you know, I was kind of thinking of like a kink in like a water hose a little
Mhm.
bit of like how like make sure that that doesn't like explode one day,
Ah,
and create longevity in the career, which is going to support longevity in
mhm.
retirement. And I also appreciated that you said, hey, like we recognize this, and then we reach out to other people who were already doing it
Mhm.
and asking them how they did it, and then trying to model after that. Because I do think that sometimes, and I do think that there should be a level of free thinking and, doing things that work within your organization and maybe thinking outside the box a little bit with some stuff. But I also think that if there's someone who's doing it really well,
Mhm.
why not reach out to them and ask what they're doing and how they did it? And sometimes I think people forget that, it's a, I would hope that it's a team and a family throughout the state, throughout the country, that there are other resources out there that you can reach out to say, hey, like we recognize that we need to do this. How are you doing it?
Yeah. And that's, and that's what it is. I mean, I'm not, uh, I'm certainly not an expert, and other people are. So why not use that resource? And they've already got that secret sauce that's working. So take what they have. And yeah, we do have to, we're a small agency, as it's been mentioned, and we kind of got to do things just a little bit differently. But you apply that secret sauce within a small agency, and I'll tell you what, man. I mean, we've seen um, since the implementation of our peer support program, and we have quite a few officers that are um, interested in that are peer support and are interested in becoming peer support. Um, I spoke with our peer support advisor, and I was shocked at the number of officers that have consulted her. So I know that there's something that's working. I mean, yeah, is it kind of shocking to hear that, hey, there's these officers that are in need of assistance? Sure, it is. Um, that said, it's also hugely well, it's great to hear that they are reaching out to that particular resource.
Yeah,
And utilizing it because that's just going to make that officer that much better to be able to get whatever it is off their chest and be able to work through whatever obstacle or whatever barriers in front of them.
100%. And I mean, it also sounds to me like the person who you selected to be in that position so far is someone who they trust,
Mhm.
which is key, because people aren't going to be going and speaking to someone that they don't trust and feel like that information is going to be confidential or feel like that person can actually help them. And so I don't know if you had a particular vetting process that you did or how you appointed, if this was like peer driven where people voted, or if you maybe could share that insight, because it sounds to me like it's really been successful because people actually trust that person.
Yeah. Well, well, we don't have a whole lot of, I mean, we don't have a real deep pool, so we're very limited in our resources. So, but the way that I saw the peer support advisor was just watching and observing interactions with the officers and kind of seeing that individual that they, kind of you can really tell when somebody has a connection and you have that trust with somebody.
Yeah.
And it seemed every time that they interacted with this with our wellness officer is that there was a level of connection. I mean, whether it was offline conversations that I didn't see, you could just tell that there was just a lot more sharing with that individual.
Mhm.
So I then went to that officer and said, what are your thoughts, in being a wellness coordinator? And, she was all for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she's been doing it. She's been in it for about a year and she's been doing it, well, not a year, about 8 months. And she's been doing a great job.
Good.
So it's
I
it's
love
it's
that.
worked out well. So I mean, yeah, there was no science behind it. It was just good pick, good draft pick.
But there's also
So,
like observation that goes into that of like, you having that awareness of like, hey, like 1 + 1 = 2.
mhm.
People are like talking to this person and I think this person would be valuable and, it's based on like my observations. So there is a little bit of awareness that went into
Mhm.
it. It wasn't like let me just, cover my eyes and spin around a
Yeah.
circle and whoever I land on is the person. So I love that you said it was a good draft pick. That's hilarious. Um, why do you think that investing in wellness is a non-negotiable?
Oh, well, this is the reason why, because as the executive, it's our duty, and then I speak for myself, but it's my duty to ensure that I provide all the resources for every member of this agency to be successful. Not only successful in the daily grind of the stuff of the job that they do, but also to be successful in life, to be successful as a parent, to be successful as, a grandparent, to be successful in their marriage and their relationships. It's my duty to provide those resources because it goes just beyond the job.
Yeah. And when we talked offline, like you said that, your people are your most valuable resource.
Hmm.
And I think that you bring up such an important point that it's not just work stuff, it's life stuff too.
Hmm.
And I appreciate that commitment of like, this is my duty to make sure that they're thriving. And then it goes back to what we said before, creating that longevity. And it's not just in the career. Obviously, you want that. You want them to be successful in this career as long as possible, but also in their lives, and you kept saying chapter two.
Yeah.
And how do you think? Because I do think that it's a challenging topic. I think retirement's a challenging topic because it's like, how do you prepare people for chapter two? How
Hmm.
do you make sure that they have the resources, not only to have that longevity so that they feel good, but then like, we know that when you leave the career, oftentimes there's other things that go with it, the
Hmm.
camaraderie, the excitement, the sense of purpose. How do you think that organizations and individuals can better prepare for chapter two?
Oh, well, I think part of it is, how does it, how would we as an organization prepare somebody for chapter two is, starting, like I'm in that situation right now. I literally have about 3 years to go. And as I'm kind of working through it, is that I know that I'm going to be that individual that is going to continue to work. I
Mm.
just, I just am. So is there something that I can do that is going to, that's going to fulfill me, right? So really doing a self-assessment of what are those things that I am super passionate about that I've always wanted to do. Um, I mean, we always, at least around in my organization, is that we'll talk about getting a part-time job or something. What are we going to do? I'll go work at Shields or something like that, or not that I'm giving them a plug. I'm just saying that's just a something that came up. Or go do sales or something, or work for school district doing janitorial work on the weekends or something. Something that's kind of, mindless. And that's just, something to make kind of ends meet. But now moving into that chapter two, you brought up that point of purpose is that what is it that you really want to get into? I mean, one of the things in my travels is, constantly talking about fishing. I don't know what it is, but everybody loves to fish, right? Um, so, but eventually there's only so many bodies of water that you can go to. And while that might be your passion, like I had a colleague that did, he became a professional fisherman. That's awesome,
That's
you
cool.
know?
Yeah.
And found that passion. But as for me, specifically, is that it's really doing that self-assessment of what is it that I really want to do. I mean, I love doing woodworking and I suck at it. I mean, I am terrible, but it gives me something to do.
Mhm.
And it's something that it gives me a challenge and, how you're trying to put something together to make it, not look like something that a third grader put together. Because I think I am the only individual in the United States that got a C in elementary art. But yeah, uh, that's kind of where where am I going to find my passion?
Yeah.
And doing that self-assessment of what am I going to do? And, financially, hopefully at retirement, I've set myself up financially where I'm okay. And that's something that I don't have to worry about. Um, so, and then comes into relationships as well. What are you going to do with your spouse or your significant other? I mean, you got to loop them into the fold as well. And how are we going to navigate this together? Because it is a big change. Just talking to folks that have done it, it is a change.
Yeah, I would imagine. And I love that advice of, think ahead, think of things that fulfill you and that you're passionate about and what you might do. And I think that that's hard to tell someone who's young. Like when
Mhm.
I was in my 20s, I wasn't thinking about what I would be doing in my 30s or 40s or 50s. It's like you're just kind
Yeah.
of day to day, and it's hard to be proactive and think about the future. But I think that there are things that you can do proactively to make sure that financially you're okay, to make sure that mentally and physically you're okay, so that you're not immobile or like super injured and you can't enjoy life. That also goes for
Mhm.
mental health, trying to set in place things as early in the career as possible so that mentally you can process the things that you're going to experience throughout the career. So when you do get into that chapter two, you feel good mentally.
Mhm.
And then as you get closer to that time, like you said, finding out what is next, and how can you create that longevity
Mhm.
afterwards, and do things that fulfill you so that that transition isn't such a stark contrast, because I'm sure that
Yeah.
it is going to be regardless, but at least there's something to look forward to. I know I mean, there's chiefs retiring all the time, but there's one chief that I've known for a while through the community, and he's awesome, just the best, and he's retiring. And he put out kind of, you know, an email that I was included on. And, I wished him all the best. And, he responded with, if it wasn't for all of the preparation
Mhm.
that I did in advance, I wouldn't feel so happy and at peace with this decision, and excited for the next chapter. He's
Yeah.
a grandfather and, just had another grandbaby. And, so that statement right there to me is like what it's all about, so
Yeah.
when you do reach that point, it's like, wow, like, you know what? I feel peaceful about this. I feel excited about the next chapter because of all of the proactive preparation that I
Mhm.
did to get me here.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, it's
thought that was cool.
yeah, that is. I being that a lot of Chiefs, their average lifespan is roughly about 4 years. You always kind of want to go out on your own terms,
Hmm.
and sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. And it's coming to that realization of well, if it's not on my own terms, yeah, it's going to be an abrupt stop. But where, at what point am I going to pick up? Maybe you take that 6 months and you do nothing and watch Netflix or whatever, right? But at that point, you have to have that date of this is what I'm going to do once that time hack happens,
Yeah.
right? And I'm gonna continue to move forward. So,
And I think too, it's like, I mean, and I've shared this before, but it sounds really, uh, what word am I thinking of? Morbid. It sounds really morbid, but it's not meant to. And for me, it's a motivator. And it's the saying, if you're not growing, you're dying.
mhm.
And it's when you stop and like you're not focused on improving yourself or growing in whatever, like it could be different ways. It could be growing as a partner. It could be growing, your own business. It could be, physically getting stronger or whatever. But if you're not focused on growth and forward momentum and you're just stuck in one place, then that's where I think you start to see, um, you know, the the demise, or you're
Mhm.
you're just sitting there. And so I think that um to your point, it's like I think keep growing, keep doing the things, and I've heard this from other chiefs. It's like the goal should be to get as much out of retirement, as many years in retirement as you got on the job.
Yeah.
And that like year of or that statistic of like, 4 or 5 years, I think is a tragedy. I think that you've worked so hard in your career that you deserve to have a long and
Mhm.
happy and successful retirement. And so if you could have this mentality of like, you know what, I made it in the job 35 years, like I want to get another 35 years out of retirement,
Oh man, yeah.
like that would be awesome. So like, why can't we strive for that? I think that would be
Mhm.
a great goal for everybody. And it all comes down to the preparation beforehand. So I love that advice. I do have one final question for you.
Sure.
What words of advice would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known that would have helped you, or something that did help you along the way to reach it to 35 years.
Oh man. No, well, there's so much. I mean, you need another hour or two to talk about this topic alone. Um, but if there's any advice that I would give somebody that's coming into the field is, you know, keep your passion. Is that you got into this job for a reason, and it's meant for a small percentage of people. Um, and you got into it for a reason. If you're not passionate about it, find what you're passionate about. And it may not be this field, but find that passion. In part because it won't seem like a job. It will seem like a hobby, and everybody does a hobby because they enjoy doing it, right? Um, but find that passion, and that there's going to be times where it's going to ebb and flow. Find those resources that are going to be able to help you get through those friction points and are really going to be able to help guide you through some of the difficult times. Um, find that resource, whatever that resource is, and take advantage of it. Continue to build your relationships, not only with the people that you work with, but with your family and outside and inside law enforcement, outside the agency. Build that network, build those relationships because you never know when you're going to need somebody to reach out to. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that. I thought those were great words of wisdom. And we have a few minutes left. If there's anything else that we missed, I'll let you take the floor, but that's all I have for you.
yeah, I don't have much. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and have this discussion with you. It's been awesome. I know that wellness has kind of been a little bit of a taboo word in the law enforcement field and actually all, public service. Um, Fortunately, is now that stigma is changing, and you're starting to see officers be a little bit more resilient. You're starting to see, at least what I've seen, is those officers that have accessed those resources and are taking the wellness, not only the physical aspect, but also the mental aspect, the resiliency component, and you're starting to really see the changes in individuals where you're not rusting out at such a fast rate.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and that is something that's amazing for me because I remember 3 years in, I was like, man, I'm crusty, you know, and for only having 3 years on the job, I shouldn't be this crusty, you know. Part of it was the environment, but I'm not seeing that as much. So I really applaud what you're doing. I applaud, that that wellness component and really really taking away that stigma and starting to steer the new generation towards that wellness because it's going to only pay dividends in the end.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. Honestly, it's been great, and hopefully we'll stay in touch in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you.